I'm Richard Taylor from the Philosophy Department at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Together with my colleague Professor Andrea Robilio at the Catholic University in Leuven, we present to you this course on Thomas Aquinas and metaphysics. This is class 13 and this is video lecture 13b. The focus here is on the commentary on the De Hebdomodibus by Thomas Aquinas, and it's chapter 5 is our main concern. This is the last chapter. This will also be the last video lecture by me. In the future, 4 video lectures will take place by Professor Andrea Robilio, and these will be on interpretations or interpretive frameworks for understanding the metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas. And that will begin next week. And so those will be 14, 15, and 16, perhaps even 17. At any rate, let's begin with Thomas Aquinas and Metaphysics, commentary on the De Hebdomodibus, chapter 5. And of course, since this is a commentary on the De Hebdomodibus of Boethius, we need to begin with Boethius himself. So let's look at the text of Boethius itself. First of all, as you will recall, in chapter 4, Boethius solved the issue at stake. And so he restates the solution at the start of chapter 5. So I paraphrase what he says as follows. Secondary goods can be good insofar as they are or exist, without being identical to the first good. You'll recall that the issue was, how could they be good, and how could things be good in themselves or in their own right? And so that was a major consideration for Boethius, and the issue has been solved then. And so instead of being identical to the first good, they're to be conceived differently. So rather, the very being of things flows from the first being, which is the first good, namely God, but the things are not similar to the first or God, because the first is a simple unity of being and good. The first is good in every way it is or exists, since it is nothing but the good, and that's God. Secondary goods could not be good in their very being unless they are from it. So if they were not created by God, they could not be good in their very being, in virtue of their very being. If not, they might participate. If they are not from God, they might participate the good, but they would not do so in such a way that in their very being they would possess from God or the good, possess their goodness from the good or God. Hence, mentally removing this connection to the good might leave it that they are good, but they would not be good insofar as they are, or their existence. So they wouldn't be good just in virtue of the fact that they exist, if that other scenario, setting God aside, and they're not being caused by God, were the case. Now, actual existence requires production by that which is truly good, namely God, though the goodness they have is such that they are good, but not in similarity to the way goodness exists as the substantial good, which is God. This is just to reiterate what I just said in the previous slide. So it's only by flowing from the good that they could be good insofar as they are. So it's only in virtue of their being caused or flowing from God, who is the good, that things can be both being and good. And so good insofar as they exist. Were it otherwise, then, they could not be good insofar as they are, quote, because they would be both outside the good and not from the good. Whereas that first good itself is being itself, and the good itself, and being the good itself. So all those are collapsed into the simplicity of God. But God, as being in the good, causes things to exist, and the things that exist are good insofar as they exist because they come from God. But the situation is not analogously the same in the case of other characteristics such as white. God is not white because God causes white. In fact, God is not white. White is not the very being of God, while good is the very being of God. And then Aquinas writes, then Boethius writes the following, and I want to go through the text very carefully so that we understand what's going on here. Quote, therefore, that they be good in this that they are, namely in the fact that they exist, in virtue of the fact that they exist, is what accompanied the will of the good, or God. A property of this sort, that they be white insofar as they are, or in this that they are, did not accompany the will of one who is not white, namely God. Neither have they flowed down from the will of one who is white. So it isn't they don't flow from God and become white because God is white. And so it is that one who was not white willed them to be white, so God did that. Because of this, are they merely white? However, since he who was good willed them to be good, they are good in this, that they are. So since the two of those characteristics are present in God, goodness and goodness and being, then they are present also in what God creates. And these notions of goodness and being flow from God. But the difference is going to be that, in fact, in things there is not the perfect simplicity and absolute unity that there is found in God with regard to good and being. So as with white, so too with just. This is my paraphrase. Things are not just merely because God willed them to be. Yes, while in God being and acting and good and just are all identical and one, such is not the case for human beings. Humans are not simple in that way, and so, even as caused by God, human beings still must act justly in order to be just. In us, the to be good and to be just are not the same, though to be and to be good are the same, albeit not in the same way as that of divine simplicity. Quote, for us, however, this is Boethius continuing, for us, however, to be is not identical with to act, for we are not simple, which I was just saying. To be good, therefore, with us is not identical with to be just, but to be in this that we are, or to be insofar as we exist, is identical in all of us. We are all of us, therefore, good things, but not also just. Close quote. That is the account of Boethius, somewhat translated as it were, so we can more readily see what he is doing in his text. Now let's turn to Aquinas. Aquinas clearly enough follows the initial lines of the text of Boethius and goes on to speak of, quote, the very essence of goodness, close quote. That is, God as the first good, in which being and good are identical and simple, such that God is the cause of things which are and are good, though those things are not caused with the perfect simplicity found in God. That is, they don't have in themselves the perfect simplicity found in God. Now, again, you see, as we've seen in earlier video discussions, the key to the reasoning is, again, perfect simplicity, divine perfect simplicity, quote, because there is in it no perfection through addition, but in its simple being it possesses every sort of perfection. And continuing the quotation then, in contrast, created things have a certain absolute goodness, that is, quae sibi competit absolute, close quote, but they would have an added goodness were it the case that it did not proceed from God as first good. But a created thing is good in its very being only if it has the relation of being created by God, who is being, and good in perfect simplicity. Now later on, Aquinas provides his own recounting of two objections. The first objection: why should things being white provide us with sufficient reason to say that their cause is white? Why should they not provide a sufficient reason, that is? In the case of God, let's just change that. Why should things being white not provide us with sufficient reason to say that their cause is white. In the case of God, God is being and goodness, and as such cause of the fact that things are good insofar as they are or exist. The accident white is a different kind of qualification than, which is a different kind of qualification than is good in the case of things created by God. Pardon me, I have to reread that. Than is, let's correct that. You can even see me do it in the video. So the accident white is a different type of qualification than is good in the case of things created by God. Quote, and I put these quotations in because I'm trying to unpack the text so that you have a good sense of how to read the text. Quote, for the being of created things, writes Aquinas, from the fact that it is from the good, has the characteristic of good, or has the character of good, as has been said. But a property of this sort, that what is created be white in this, that it is, or insofar as it exists, is not consequent upon the will of God for this reason. It did not flow down from the will of one white, in the way that goods have flowed down from the will of the good, so that it might be said that their being is white inasmuch as they are from a first white. Close quote. No, it doesn't work that way. Quote, but because God, who is good, has willed all things to be good, therefore they are good in this, namely, that they are. Namely, inasmuch as their being has the character of good, because their being is from the good. Now the second objection, in my own paraphrase, sure, white as a property does not work the way good does for creatures. But surely just does work. The notion of just does work the way good does, since God is good and also just by God's very being. Response for Aquinas. Just is predicated in virtue of action, but good is predicated in virtue of being. So there are two reasons here. One, quote, but the act with which justice is concerned does not belong to all, nor even in those to whom it does belong is it identical with their being. Hence it remains that not all things are just insofar as they are. Now continuing the second objection, second reason here now. 2, quote, in God, however, every aspect of goodness is to be found, and therefore he is not only good, but just. Not all species of goodness, however, are found in all beings, but different ones are in different beings. And therefore it is not necessary that the species that is justice should flow down to all beings, writes Aquinas, as goodness flows down. Hence, some beings are just, whereas some have another species of goodness. And yet all are good, inasmuch as they are derived from the first good. So you can see the importance here in this discussion of the argument from simplicity and what Aquinas is doing. I suppose also now it's time for us to sit back and ask what Aquinas was up to with regard to this entire work, and certainly in the reasoning we see immediately present here. That I think I want to save, however, for the classroom discussion, because I'd like to get some student input before I offer perhaps my suggestions on this matter. But I also want you to think deeply about the issue of the purpose of the work and also the issue of presuppositions of the work. And I think this will make for a very hearty classroom discussion. And that's the end of this video.